properties in the middle of renovation are much harder to understand because they're not being lived in, so you don't have the vapor from normal living, and there are often things you can't see, such as in this case I couldn't see under the subfloor because it had new timber laid down and it was inaccessible. But what we have here is was recently purchased and well, probably about 6-9 months ago, and then water started showing on the party wall. So not on the chimney breast, but all along the side of the party wall, and in very distinctive bands. And this was after replastering. I can imagine there was dampness there, but the walls were replastered and the dampness came back. The chimney breasts have been dry lined, and that's got to tell us something, and I'll come back to that later. Looking on the other side of the wall, on the neighbour's side, we don't see the same dampness, but there again it's covered, so it's possible that it's hiding something as well. Now notice we have damp proofing treatment, so those dots at the base of the wall where a non-absorbent solution is pushed into a chemical is pushed into a wall. Siloxane is the most common one, and that's because of the belief that hygroscopic salts come from groundwater, but in fact they don't. They typically come from burning of fossil fuels, but we'll talk about that later. But it's trying to break the movement from the water in the groundwater, which is the water under the water table, up into the property. But since hygroscopic salts are not a source of water, there's no relevance. In fact, this area is not at risk of groundwater. It's in central London. It's in London where the groundwater is pumped out, but we've got a tube line nearby, the Oval, and all the groundwater is pumped out well below the tube line. Otherwise, you'd have a risk. There are some rivers nearby, but they're not going to affect this because it's been properly drained. Now, I removed a little section of plaster just to test it for nitrates. If it goes red, there are nitrates, and indeed it went red, very pink coloured red, and that's a sign of nitrates. Now, the most common hygroscopic salts, and we'll talk about that in a sec, is calcium nitrate. It forms what's called deliquescence. It's a type of condensation at relative humidity of about 50%. So you can see it in the summertime as well as winter. It's like a condensation you get all year round. We can see some hygroscopic salts on the outside, and it's common in central London to see these hygroscopic salts. They cause the soot to cling to the side of buildings, and you see them in bands above. Now, this is looking inside a chimney breast in the property, and obviously that's soot, but the hygroscopic salts will go into the soot and will become embedded in the chimney breast within it. And most of the time, 99% of the time, you never see them, but it's only when it's been replastered or the chimney breast is removed or something has triggered the hygroscopic salts to come to the fore. And I suspect it's the replastering. Now, looking through a thermal imaging camera where blue is colder than red, this time of year it's not as distinctive, but hygroscopic salts generally won't be where it's cold because they're not caused by normal condensation, it's deliquescence. So I believe these are not hygroscopic salts, and they're probably triggered by the replastering of the wall, but it could have been the dampness in the subfloor, and we will look at that as well. So there's also dampness along the flank wall, and we'll look at that. This is part of the kitchen. Normally you get brown staining when there's penetrating damp. It's difficult to see in this wall, and I suspect it's not penetrating the whole way through. I'm seeing mould, and mould is a sign of excess vapour from insufficient ventilation meeting a cold wall. This is an old kitchen, rear extension or addition, should I say. part of the original design. I think it was originally a flat, so there would have been a much higher vapor load relative to a house use, property used as a house. So on the outside there are render cracks, and the worst of the cracking is actually vertical, so you don't get quite as much water in vertical crack. But I'll show you an example of a horizontal crack, and you can see the water coming down and being sucked in through capillary action deep into the wall. What happens often is that it just goes into the outer skin of wall, but a wet brick is a poor insulator, causing heat loss, increasing the risk of condensation. So even if it isn't necessarily penetrating the whole way through, it can be the condensation that causes the dampness. So that's the primary cause, and then the secondary cause is the render crack on the outside. But you still ought to fix the render crack. And also take the bikes and as much of the metal away from the wall. And if you can insulate it, I think you'll appreciate that. If nothing else, I would put insulation around those metal ties. So to note, your builder has used slurry on the side of the wall. So the slurry is often used to hide damp. The downside is it causes greater heat loss because it's a poor insulator, and also it's hiding rather than dealing with the root cause, and vapor was the root cause in this case. There's some discussion about vapor in the subfloor void, dampness in the subfloor void when the builders looked at it. It's difficult for me to tell because I obviously wasn't there. But I put in a hygrometer into the subfloor and I left it with you, and you can use moldpoint.co.uk to look up what the dew point is in the subfloor and just compare it to the external dew point. It should be similar to the external dew point or the internal, and just see whether vapor is being generated in the subfloor. But it didn't look too bad to me while I was there and studying it on the computer afterwards. So I tested for water, for a leak, but there was no movement on your dial. So that's a sign that you don't have a leak, which is great. And you sent me the CCTV video of the drains. And I note that there is some damage in lateral 2, I think it's called, close to, but not underneath the property. So I sort of doubt that's causing much in the way of dampness internally, but you should talk to the CCTV people. So have a listen to the section on data loggers. Here's a section on data loggers. It's at damp.ai/detect. And what you want to do is drop your files in and then select the area that you're going to make a comparison. During the survey, the property was vacant, and so I don't think it's going to give us particularly meaningful information. It's more about going forward and explaining various things. But two things jump out at me. One is that your dew point is very consistent high, well above the outside temperature, and in a vacant property you really should have a dehumidifier running permanently, a 20 litre plus dehumidifier draining. The relative humidity is very consistently at 65% relative humidity. That is a sign of hygroscopic salts. And the other thing is that you've got higher vapor in the dining area compared to the kitchen, and yet they're all open plan and vacant. So that suggests that there's another influence, which I think in this case is potentially hygroscopic salts. So in summary, the key issue, in my opinion, is that you have hygroscopic salts. I think they probably always were there, but they were triggered by the replastering of that wall. I think a simple solution is to either dry line or use Celotex or Celotex and plasterboard, so thermal insulating plasterboard. You only need a small, maybe, well, you want to have whatever the thickness the wall is, but maybe 25 millimeters, 35 millimeters. That would give you some insulation as well from your neighbour, so you know there are benefits from that point of view. But you just need a separation, a physical separation, and I would take it up to probably about halfway up. Make sure it's about 300 mil from the highest point that the hygroscopic salts are showing. The other and cheaper alternative is to use an oil-based primer such as Zinza cover stain. You need to put on 2 or 3 coats. Make sure it's properly covered, and then you can paint it.